In the bustling corridors of the Los Angeles County Courthouse, 19-year-old Marcus Johnson stood poised and resolute, his hands in his pockets, facing a room full of spectators, lawyers, and a judge who had already made up his mind. Charged with grand theft auto and resisting arrest, Marcus was accused of crimes he knew deep down he hadn't committed. But what struck the most was the way Judge Alan Davies, seated high above, seemed to dismiss Marcus as just another troubled teenager, destined to lose this battle before it even began. Marcus, however, was no ordinary teenager. Raised in a home where his mother, a paralegal, would often recount the failures and corruptions of the justice system, he had spent his youth not memorizing basketball stats, but absorbing case laws, debating legal strategies, and breaking down trials with the precision of someone far beyond his years. He wasn't just here to fight for himself, was here to challenge the very system that had failed so many before him. He knew that to win, he couldn't just stand quietly in the defendant's seat, had to dismantle their arguments piece by piece. When the prosecutor confidently outlined the evidence, Marcus stood his ground, calm yet unwavering, a glint of determination in his eyes. As the courtroom settled into an uneasy silence, Marcus prepared to prove something much greater than his innocence was going to prove, that knowledge and courage could turn the tide of justice, even against the most seasoned adversaries. This wasn't just a trial for Marcus. It was a chance to redefine what it meant to be heard, to be understood, and to take control of his own destiny. As Marcus stood at the defendant's table, the air in the courtroom felt like it was closing in on him. Judge Alan Davies leaned back in his chair, clearly amused by the whole situation. Marcus was just another teenager in trouble, in the judge's eyes no different from the hundreds of others who had walked into this very courtroom, facing the harsh realities of the system. To Davies, this was just another case to process before his afternoon golf game, a mere inconvenience to him, a man who had seen it all. But Marcus had different plans. The courtroom was filled with whispers and skeptical glances as the prosecutor, Mitchell Carrington, stood and made his case. He painted a picture of Marcus as a criminal caught red-handed, fleeing from the police in a stolen Audi. The car was found with Marcus's fingerprints on the steering wheel, and he was caught after a brief chase through downtown. The evidence, as Carrington claimed, was straightforward and damning. The prosecutor's polished confidence flowed through the room like a tide, convincing the jury that Marcus was guilty without question. It was the perfect case, or so it seemed. Marcus didn't flinch, didn't let the weight of the accusations crush him. Instead, he stood quietly, observing everything, every word, every look, every shift in the courtroom. His mind raced through the years of knowledge he had absorbed from his mother's paralegal work, the countless trial strategies he had studied, and the mock debates he had perfected with himself. He knew how to spot the cracks in a case, and he saw them now. The evidence Carrington presented wasn't as flawless as it seemed. Something was off. The moment came when Carrington casually mentioned the testimony of Officer Daniel Ruiz, who allegedly saw Marcus behind the wheel of the stolen Audi. Marcus's eyes sharpened. Ruiz's report said he had witnessed the entire event, but Marcus knew that this officer hadn't even been on duty when the chase began. It was a small detail that no one else had caught, but Marcus had. With the confidence of someone far beyond his years, Marcus raised his hand, requesting to verify the GPS logs of Officer Ruiz. The request was simple, but it struck at the heart of the prosecutor's case. Carrington hesitated. The silence stretched as Marcus stood still, waiting. He knew that if Carrington was confident in his case, he wouldn't be stalling. The prosecutor's unease was palpable as the judge finally gave in, agreeing to verify the officer's GPS logs. Marcus's mind raced with strategy, knowing this was only the beginning. As the room fell into an uncomfortable silence, Marcus took a calculated step forward and turned to the jury. He knew the next move had to be precise. He addressed them calmly, explaining that the prosecution's evidence was incomplete, flawed, and most importantly, unverified. His fingerprints on the car didn't prove he stole it, just like fingerprints on a jacket in a store didn't make someone a thief. He had touched the car briefly, out of curiosity, but that was far from stealing it. The tension in the room thickened. The once confident prosecutor was now scrambling, searching through his papers for something that would regain control of the narrative. But Marcus wasn't finished. He pointed out that the forensic evidence used against him wasn't properly handled, it wasn't cross-examined, and no forensic specialist had been called to testify. Marcus's calm, controlled demeanor started to make the courtroom shift. The story Carrington had been selling suddenly seemed more like a fabrication, a narrative built on assumptions and not facts. Marcus's final blow came when he entered a statement from the actual owner of the stolen Audi, Raymond Whitaker. Whitaker had confirmed that he had left his car running at the gas station and that someone who wasn't Marcus must have taken it. The truth was in the details, and Marcus was the only one who had noticed them. The prosecutor's case, once airtight, was unraveling before everyone's eyes. Marcus didn't need to shout or become aggressive. He didn't need to make dramatic gestures. His quiet, unwavering confidence and deep understanding of the law spoke for itself. What started as a routine case for the prosecutor and the judge had transformed into a lesson in justice. Marcus wasn't just fighting for his own freedom, he was exposing the cracks in a system that often overlooked the truth. His calm demeanor, sharp mind, and refusal to back down had turned the tide in his favor. The courtroom that had once looked down on him now saw him for what he truly was. A young man capable of taking down a seasoned prosecutor and judge with nothing but the truth and the power of knowledge. The courtroom fell into an eerie silence as Marcus stood tall, watching the prosecutor, Mitchell Carrington, struggle to regain his composure. Carrington's earlier smugness had faded, and now he was on the defensive. Marcus's methodical approach was beginning to pay off, and the young man, once underestimated by everyone in the room, was now commanding the attention of the entire courtroom. The prosecutor had relied too heavily on his polished confidence, assuming that the charges against Marcus would be a quick and easy win. But Marcus had been preparing for this moment his entire life. He wasn't going to let a flawed case define his future. With the judge, Alan Davies, visibly agitated, Marcus knew this was his opportunity to press forward and expose the fatal weaknesses in the prosecution's case. Carrington had presented evidence that appeared to be damning. Marcus's fingerprints on the steering wheel of a stolen car. It sounded convincing, even reasonable, but Marcus knew better. He had spent countless hours absorbing case law, practicing trial strategies, and learning from the mistakes his mother, Denise Dawson, had seen in her years as a paralegal. This case wasn't about a young man who was guilty. It was about a flawed system that had been set up to make assumptions and sweep inconvenient truths under the rug. When Marcus first entered his defense, he did so with precision, quietly asking for Officer Ruiz's GPS logs to verify his location at the time of the chase. Ruiz's testimony, after all, was one of the key points in the prosecution's case. The officer had supposedly witnessed Marcus behind the wheel, but Marcus knew Ruiz wasn't even on duty when the alleged chase occurred. This simple request for evidence verification was a game changer. It was a tactic so subtle and effective that it caught everyone in the room off guard, including the prosecutor. The moment Carrington hesitated, the courtroom knew something wasn't right. While the judge and the jury processed this new revelation, Marcus's confidence only grew. He didn't rush, didn't shout, and didn't rely on theatrics to prove his innocence. Instead, he used logic, patience, and the law to dismantle the case piece by piece. Marcus knew that evidence alone wasn't enough to prove guilt or innocence. The handling of that evidence, the methods used to gather it, and the reliability of the witnesses were just as important. Marcus exposed these inconsistencies with ease, questioning the prosecution's reliance on flawed fingerprint evidence and the absence of proper forensic testimony. He challenged the prosecution's narrative with such clarity that even the jury began to question the assumptions they had been presented with. But the true turning point came when Marcus introduced the testimony of Raymond Whitaker, the owner of the stolen Audi. Whitaker had been ignored by the prosecution, his statement buried in the case file. When Marcus revealed that Whitaker had admitted to leaving his car running at a gas station and that the thief had been a different person, the entire case started to unravel. Carrington's failure to include this crucial detail in his presentation was a glaring oversight, one that Marcus had expertly exploited. It was proof that the prosecution's case had not been built on facts, but on rushed assumptions and bias. As the judge, Carrington, and everyone in the courtroom processed this bombshell, Marcus stood calmly, his voice steady. He wasn't just defending himself, he was showing everyone in the room the flaws in a system that had prematurely decided his guilt. For the first time, the judge, who had dismissed Marcus as just another troubled teen, seemed to recognize the depth of what was happening. The once complacent Judge Davies sat up straighter, his expression shifting from smug confidence to hesitant contemplation. By the time Marcus was done, the courtroom knew one undeniable truth. He wasn't just another defendant. He was someone who had studied the system and was capable of using it to his advantage. What started as a seemingly straightforward case had turned into a powerful display of personal courage and legal savvy. Marcus had used his knowledge not just to save himself, but to expose a system that too often relied on assumptions rather than truth. The prosecutor's case had crumbled, and for the first time, Marcus was seen for what he truly was, not a criminal but a young man, capable of reshaping the narrative and securing his own future. As the case continued to unravel, Marcus felt the weight of the courtroom shift. Every step he took, every word he uttered seemed to chip away at the walls of the prosecution's case. When the moment arrived for him to introduce Raymond Whitaker's statement, the silence in the courtroom became palpable. The tension hung in the air as everyone realized that what Marcus was about to present could be the final nail in the coffin for the prosecution's argument. The courtroom had initially viewed Marcus with skepticism, a 19-year-old accused of grand theft auto and resisting arrest. But as he slowly and carefully dismantled the case, the audience, the jury, even the judge, began to see him in a new light. He wasn't just a defendant trying to save himself. He was a young man using his sharp intellect and deep understanding of the law to expose the flaws and corruption within the system. This wasn't about just one man's freedom, it was about making the system confront its own shortcomings. Raymond Whitaker's statement was the key piece that exposed the cracks in the prosecution's case. The fact that Whitaker had left his car running and admitted to seeing a different person in the vehicle, person who had actually stolen, it was crucial information that had been conveniently ignored. When Marcus revealed this to the courtroom, it was clear the prosecution had been withholding vital evidence. The gasps and murmurs that followed told Marcus all he needed to know. This was a moment of realization for everyone in the room. What had seemed like a cut-and-dry case was now a tangled web of missed opportunities, ignored testimonies, and poor judgment. Judge Davies, who had initially treated the case like just another routine trial, now sat forward in his chair, his expression shifting from indifference to concern. It was a moment that transcended the courtroom drama. For the first time, the judge, the prosecutor, and the jury were forced to confront not just Marcus's case, but the larger issue of how often the justice system overlooked critical details in the rush to close cases. Marcus had revealed the truth, not with grand gestures or emotional outbursts, but with calm precision and a command of the facts. Carrington, the prosecutor, could only watch as his case crumbled before him. His confidence, once so secure, faltered under the pressure of Marcus's logic and strategy. The prosecutor tried to salvage his case by pointing to the fingerprint evidence, but even this seemed weak in the face of the growing revelations. Marcus's challenge of the fingerprint analysis, highlighting the absence of the forensic specialist's testimonially, added fuel to the fire. It was another crack in the prosecution's armor, and as the moments passed, it became clear that the jury was no longer as convinced as they had been at the beginning of the trial. For Marcus, this wasn't just about defending himself. He knew the stakes were higher than his freedom. He was fighting against a system that was all too quick to make assumptions and overlook the truth. The trial had become a reflection of something larger, the biases and flaws that often lead to wrongful convictions. In a courtroom that had once been filled with doubt and dismissal, Marcus had shifted the narrative. He was no longer just a defendant in a criminal trial, was a symbol of the fight for justice in a system that sometimes didn't work for everyone. As the judge finally gave the verdict, case dismissed, the room erupted in a mixture of shock, relief, and realization. Marcus had not only won his case, he had forced the system to face its own errors. The victory was his, but it was also a victory for every person who had been wrongly accused, overlooked, or forgotten by the justice system. Marcus had proven that with the right knowledge, the right strategy, and the courage to speak up, even the most powerful systems could be challenged and held accountable. The story of Marcus Johnson serves as a powerful reminder that sometimes the most unexpected people can challenge and dismantle a flawed system. At only 19 years old, Marcus demonstrated that knowledge, preparation, and courage can allow even the most vulnerable to stand up against injustice. His victory wasn't just about clearing his name, it was a triumph for truth and accountability. The key lesson here is the importance of standing firm and questioning the status quo, especially when things seem unfair or when the truth is being obscured. For older generations, this story underscores the value of resilience and the necessity of passing on knowledge. Marcus grew up in a household where the importance of understanding the law and the workings of the justice system was instilled in him. This shows how empowering younger people with the right tools and wisdom can lead to change. Additionally, Marcus's strategic thinking teaches us that real change often comes not from loud protests or emotional outbursts, but from careful observation, logical thinking, and most importantly, a willingness to challenge what seems unquestionable. As we age, it is easy to feel like we have little power to change things, but Marcus's story proves that any, regardless of age or circumstance, can stand up for justice if they are equipped with knowledge and determination. In life, as we continue to grow older, let us not forget that the pursuit of truth and fairness never becomes obsolete. Whether in our personal lives or in society, the fight for justice is a lifelong endeavor, and we each have the power to contribute to making the world a better place.